Hello, and welcome back to Bazant Honey. What we're going to talk about today is just a quick little how-to, or just more or less tips on something that's a little bit expensive when you're first getting into beekeeping. And that's actually going to be the honey extractor. Now, when you're first starting out and you don't want to buy that equipment, there's methods of basically, especially if you're using foundationless, you can pull the comb out and you can just crush it down and let it like sieve through. But then, of course, you're taking all the wax away. You're forcing the bees to remake the wax. Of course, the other way of doing things is more like commercial beekeepers, where, of course, we're using foundations, and we're going to do centrifuging and spin it out. You can do that with traditional comb, but the problem you might run into is when you centrifuge it, the comb can throw out because there's really nothing holding it back other than the wax and the comb. So a lot of times you can get breakage, and they blow apart and everything. So it's really kind of better with foundations. But hey, everybody does their own thing, so you got to try what works. But I built one of these myself. They're awfully expensive, like a 4-frame one, just even a hand crank hobby one. I mean, you're looking at they're probably a little cheaper in the States, but in Canada here, Canadian, you're looking at. I was gonna get a used one that did 3 frames, and it was I think it was gonna be I was gonna give them $300 for it, or a few $100s, anyways. You want to get something that does like 4 frames, and it really cranks it up there and everything. I mean, you could be looking at $800, $900, $1,000. You start getting into mechanical, you're looking, upwards $1,500, $2,000. So, we're talking big bucks. And, when you're just getting started, that's a lot of money. Now, my bees pulled almost 300 pounds in their first year, 2 hives last year. And actually I had one hive that wasn't performing as well as it could, so I might even have been able to pull over 300 pounds had they been performing at maximum capacity. So that's a lot of wax or a lot of honey to be trying to extract, just by doing like tip and drip methods and all kinds of things. I mean, it would have been almost impossible to get all that out there. And then I have the added problem that with canola honey, the type of sugars that the canola the honey makes, the canola makes into honey, basically it crystallizes fairly quickly, almost to the point where if you don't get it out at the end of, like, once that honey is produced, capped inside the hive, I only have like a month, not even a few weeks to get that stuff out of there at most, because if I don't get it out of there, some people just leave the boxes of honey stacked up, and they'll get it later. But the problem with the canola is in that time it can actually solidify inside the frames, inside the wax, and then that might be okay if the bees could use it, but then the same problem occurs in the winter, is that with heavy crystallization, the bees don't have any access to liquid water, so there's no way for them to break down the crystals and melt them down and actually produce food out of it. So in other climates, crystallized honey can be consumed during the winter. In our climate, there's absolutely no way. So they'll actually starve to death. They could have a hive full of honey and they won't eat any of it because it's all unedible to them, or inedible. So one of the things I just wanted to go over is quickly how I made my honey extractor. There's some things that I did that maybe I could help other people learn from my mistakes. There might be easier ways to do this than I did it, but this is how I did it. I looked online, I looked at a lot of different ways that different people were doing it, and I just kind of like went with my own system in the end. But in general, they all work the same, right? So what I did is this is very low tech, very low tech. We just have a board with a wheelbarrow bearing in it, and there's a bunch of tape wrapped very tightly around the shaft here that just gives it so it doesn't wiggle around too much, and that's how we hold this centered. And then we're just using screws, good old-fashioned deck screws here. Make sure you can see that. Now, we don't have to take this on and off every time. This is just right now to, when we need to open it up, clean it, do whatever we need to do. See? So that just removes. And in here we have the apparatus. So let's pull that out. We'll take a look at that in a minute. And then way down in the bottom there, we have the base unit. And then you can see up at the top, you can see the honey gate that we installed. Over here. So yeah, so we'll pull that base unit out. We'll take a look at that base unit, and I'll show you what I did with this. This is the base unit. This is what sits in the bottom and holds everything centered and keeps it from moving out of position, and yeah, just keeps us right in the center. Obviously, we can't have that impacting the sides. It's going to be moving very fast, and we don't want plastic shavings or metal shavings or any shavings. In the honey, we want everything to spin freely and not touch anything. So in order to do that, you got to find a way to get this thing to sit in the center. Now, what I did is I had some stainless old cabinet stuff around for it was just essentially just like garage shelving, and I took a grinder blade and I cut it into pieces and I measured it and I basically made it fit the bottom of my garbage can exactly, so that it almost just kind of like presses in. It just gently wedges at the bottom, and that's that. And then it is fairly heavy. You know, you see right here I used a galvanized piece of you'd use this for your water pipes in your house and stuff like that, piece of piping, and then I took a 1/2-inch fitting at the top and I welded a 1/2-inch fitting to the top of it right there as like a little cup, because the next part essentially just has a little nipple, sits out the bottom, and it drops right in there, and then it just spins. It's pretty low tech again. It's pretty straightforward. So here we have the cage that I built. Now, one of the things that I had a problem with was that when you make one with four frames, it's actually quite wide. You know, an extractor that would take 4 frames, they're usually quite large, a lot wider than this garbage can. You know, in retrospect, it probably would have been a lot easier to just break this down into a triangle, and it would have been able to tighten it right up. But by making it a square, it really pushes these corners out. So I did have a little bit of problem in the testing part when I was first getting it working, with making sure it wasn't impacting the sides. I really had to pull the materials here. I had to button them in real tight. I had to make sure things weren't too big, because the clearances, I mean, frankly, are very, very tight in my unit. So something that could be done differently is maybe make this a 3 unit instead of a 4 unit. It would just make it so much easier to build, and you'd have less stress. Oh yeah, and these edges that I'm screwing to, all these are pieces of 2x2 that I have sandwiched over the edge, and then I've screwed together from both directions and then siliconed as well. So they're pretty solidly on there. They're a part of the garbage can now almost. And as you can see, so let's spin that up. Normally we have a lid over top of this to protect debris, keep anything out while we're spinning, make sure we're not getting anything in there. But for demonstration purposes, we are going to leave it off so you can see. Extractor. So as you can see, it spins quite nicely. The sounds you're hearing are just the pin at the bottom, you know, basically wobbling inside of its holder. And at no point did it actually impact the side. The last thing to mention is that you want to make sure, the reason that it has to have a structure that's kind of held upwards is you want to make sure that you're getting up high enough that that the apparatus isn't spinning in the honey. You need somewhere for the honey to go, unless you're going to be extracting it immediately. If you wanted to have like an open bottom system, where as you spun it, it just poured out, that would be fine. You could actually have it a lot lower because it just leaves as fast as it comes in. But this way I'm able to kind of place this where I want to. I can use it as I wish, and then when we need to extract it, we just basically lift it up onto either a table, or we set up some sawhorses above where we need to drain into, and then we sieve it out and drain it into it. But anyways, that was just some tips. Obviously, I didn't, do a step-by-step how-to here, but hopefully this gives you some ideas. Maybe kind of sparks your brain and lets you maybe think of ways to do it yourself. There is lots of different ways to do it. You can heat a room up and let it drain out just by scraping it out and let it drip. But truth be told, that is a very slow process, and if you've got any real harvest coming, that might be difficult. Obviously, our friends, the flow frames over here, help alleviate some of those problems, and that's why we're going to get into trying to use these this year. I'm actually really excited about that. I'm going to be leaving a set of those in my backyard this year. That's where those are going. So hopefully that's as easy as walking in the backyard, sliding a little table up, setting up some mason jars, and away we go. But that's coming really soon, actually. We're going to be putting apivar in our hives in the next probably week to 2 weeks at most. We have to get that in there if we want to start collecting honey for the end of May into June kind of thing. So we might be able to get a harvest coming out basically the end of June or mid-June even, might be able to start get some honey trickling in. But we need to get the drugs in the hive soon because we have a withholding period after the drugs come out of the hive. They need to be in there about 45 days, and then we have to withhold for 15 days at least before we can actually start collecting honey for human consumption. And that's, of course, what it's all about right now. So anyways, thanks for coming out. Thanks for joining us, checking out our honey catcher. Obviously, if we get a couple seasons with this, maybe even just after this season, we might make enough of our initial investment back to buy an actual honey extractor. Obviously, this is fantastic. I saved a lot of money, but this is very temporary. This is just to kind of push off some of the startup costs, some of the extra things we need to worry about. I'm standing beside a lot of sugar, so we're going to get into making some sugar water pretty soon, and there's a lot going on. So just come and join us. Check it out. Subscribe, hit like, and comment, please. Have a good day.